An afternoon that would forever change a family's life. Juana Esperanza Morales, only 5 years old, with fiery red hair and a small mole on her left cheek, disappeared while playing in the street. No traces, no reliable witnesses, no explanations. Local authorities closed the case after months of intense investigation. Just another child added to the statistics of the missing. But her father, Roberto Morales, never gave up. For 20 years, he traveled across Mexico, every city, every town, searching for his lost daughter. Until in March 2016, on a lonely highway in Nuevo Leon, a devastating discovery would change everything. The truth about what really happened to Juana Esperanza Morales was about to be revealed, and it was more horrifying than any parent could ever imagine. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more cases like this. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. The April sun in 1996 bathed the dusty streets of San Luis Potosi when Juana Esperanza Morales left her house for the last time. At only 5 years old, her age contrasted with the maturity in her. Blue eyes, a gift from her Spanish paternal grandmother. Her red hair glowed like fire in the afternoon light, and the small circular mole on her left cheek made her unmistakable among the neighborhood children. The Morales family lived in a modest adobe house in the Tangamanga neighborhood. Roberto Morales, her father, worked as a mechanic in a local garage, while her mother, Carmen, washed clothes for others to help support the household. Juana was their only child, their most precious treasure. That afternoon, like so many others, Juana was playing in the street with her best friend Sofia, a girl her same age who lived 3 houses down. The 2 little girls had built a sandcastle on the sidewalk using empty cans and pieces of cardboard they had found near Dona Mercedes' taco stand. Carmen watched from the kitchen window while preparing beans for dinner. The neighborhood was considered safe, or at least everyone believed it was. Neighbors had known each other for decades. Children played freely in the cobbled streets, and mothers shared the task of keeping watch over them. Around 6 p.m., as the sun began to set behind the mountains surrounding the city, Carmen looked out again to call for Juana. The street was empty. Sofia had gone home moments earlier, according to what she yelled from her door, but Juana had vanished. The first few minutes were spent searching calmly. Carmen went door to door, asking if anyone had seen the little girl. Roberto arrived home from work and immediately joined the search. They combed every corner of the neighborhood, every yard, every spot where Juana might have been hiding while playing. When night fell, panic gripped the family. Neighbors formed search groups with flashlights and lanterns. Don Esteban, the most respected merchant in the neighborhood, contacted the local police. The response from the authorities was discouraging. The officer who took the report, a burly man with a gray mustache, barely looked up from his papers while taking the basic information. According to protocol, they had to wait 24 hours before officially declaring a child missing. That first night was the longest in Roberto and Carmen's lives. They took turns going out to search in the dark streets while the others stayed home in case Juana returned. The cries of her name echoed throughout the neighborhood until dawn, mixing with the barking of stray dogs and the anguished silence of a shocked community. The morning of April 24th confirmed their worst fears. Juana Esperanza Morales had disappeared without a trace. The first official day of investigation began with bureaucratic formalities that deeply frustrated the Morales family. The officer in charge of the case, Commander Hector Villanueva, was a middle-aged man with over 15 years of service in the municipal police. His experience was mostly limited to petty thefts and neighborly disputes. Cases of missing children were unfamiliar territory for him. Sofia's statement, the last person to see Juana, was brief and confusing. The 5-year-old girl could barely explain that they were playing when a blue car arrived. A man offered them candy, but she ran home because her mom had called her. When she turned around, Juana was gone. Sofia's parents, nervous about the situation, limited what details their daughter could share. Fear had spread throughout the neighborhood, and many residents preferred to keep their children away from police questioning. During the first week, the search intensified. Neighborhood volunteers combed empty lots, dry creeks, and abandoned buildings within several kilometers. Roberto temporarily left his job to dedicate himself fully to the search for his daughter. Carmen, through constant tears, posted photos of Juana on every pole, wall, and window she could find. The physical description of the girl was very specific: curly red hair, light blue eyes, fair skin, approximately 1 meter tall, and the distinctive circular mole on her left cheek. It was impossible to mistake her for another child, which initially gave the family hope that someone would easily recognize her, but clues were practically non-existent. The supposed blue car mentioned by Sofia was never found. The few witnesses who claimed to have seen something that afternoon gave contradictory and unreliable descriptions. The investigation quickly stalled, Commander Villanueva began to suggest theories that further demoralized the family. Perhaps Juana had gotten lost and was found in another city. Maybe she had been informally adopted by a family that couldn't have children. These benign explanations clashed with the darker fears that haunted Roberto and Carmen. Through sleepless nights, the local community responded with a mix of solidarity and gossip. While some neighbors organized collections to help with search expenses, others began to speculate about potential negligence by the parents. Social stigma added to the already unbearable pain of the loss. Local media covered the story for a few days, but it soon faded into the background as other, more sensational news emerged. Juana's photo appeared in newspapers and TV shows, but the calls from people who thought they had seen her turned out to be false alarms or cases of mistaken identity. By the end of the first month, the reality was clear: Juana had disappeared without a trace, and the local authorities lacked the resources and experience to solve a case of such magnitude. The months following Juana's disappearance became a routine of pain and fractured hope for the Morales family. Roberto returned to work at the mechanic shop, but he was never the same. His co-workers noticed how his hands trembled when holding tools, and how his eyes constantly drifted into the distance, searching for something he would never find. Carmen developed an obsession with keeping Juana's room exactly as it had been the last day she saw her, exactly as she had left it the day she disappeared. The little bed with floral sheets, the toys scattered on the floor, even the dirty clothes. In the hamper, everything remained untouched. Every morning, Carmen would enter the room to clean the dust that settled on the objects, whispering prayers and promises to her absent daughter. The official investigation gradually dwindled until it became just another file in Commander Villanueva's cabinet. The organized searches stopped after the third month, when it became clear that there were no new leads to pursue. The posters with Juana's photograph began to peel off the poles, faded by the sun and rain, until they eventually vanished altogether. The Tangamanga neighborhood experienced a subtle but profound change. Parents became more protective of their children, establishing stricter rules about playing in the street. The community's collective innocence had been fractured, and although daily life continued, a shadow of distrust toward strangers and once normal situations lingered. Roberto began traveling occasionally to nearby cities, following rumors and supposed leads that surfaced sporadically: Guadalajara, Monterrey, Mexico City. Each trip represented a new glimmer of hope that invariably ended in disappointment. Carmen accompanied him when she could, but most of the time he went alone, carrying photographs of Juana and an increasingly fragile faith. The years passed slowly. 1997, 1998, 1999. Each anniversary of Juana's disappearance was marked with a mass at the local parish, attended by fewer people each year. While the neighbors still expressed sympathy toward the family, they gradually returned to their normal routines. The pain of the Morales family became a private burden they carried in silence. In the year 2000, Roberto made a difficult decision to expand his search beyond state borders. He had heard stories about child trafficking networks that transported children to remote regions of the country. The idea terrified him, but it also offered a logical explanation for his daughter's complete disappearance. Carmen, meanwhile, found comfort in her religious faith. She joined a group of mothers who had lost children under various circumstances, and together they prayed the rosary every afternoon in the neighborhood church. Their shared pain forged deep bonds, even though none of the other mothers had experienced the specific torment of not knowing what had happened to their child. The specialists the family consulted over the years offered little comfort. A psychologist explained the stages of grief, but how do you grieve without the certainty of death? A private investigator they briefly hired in 2001 charged a significant fee for inquiries that produced no concrete results. As the 5th anniversary of Juana's disappearance approached, Roberto and Carmen had aged visibly. Their hair had begun to gray prematurely, their faces showed the fatigue of years of relentless searching, and their marriage had somehow survived the constant pressure of shared pain. By 2005, Juana's disappearance had become part of Tangamanga's collective past. The children who had once played with her were now teenagers who barely remembered the little redhead with the mole on her cheek. New families who moved into the neighborhood were completely unaware of the tragedy that had marked the community a decade earlier. Roberto had developed a work routine that allowed him to maintain some emotional stability. His skills as a mechanic were well recognized throughout the area, and the workshop where he worked had become his refuge. Among dismantled engines and familiar tools, he found moments of mental peace that contrasted with the constant anguish at home that Carmen had channeled her grief into community service. She became a respected figure in the parish, organizing charity events and supporting other families in crisis. Her personal experience with loss had given her a unique wisdom to comfort those going through difficult times. Still, nights remained the hardest time for both of them. Roberto developed the habit of walking through the neighborhood streets after dinner, retracing the same path he had followed countless times during the first months of the search. Carmen, for her part, had long nightly conversations with the photo of Juana she kept on her nightstand. The technological advances of the time brought new hope. Roberto learned to use the internet at a cafe in the city center, spending hours searching for information about similar disappearances and organizations that helped families like theirs. He created profiles on emerging social media platforms, posting Juana's photograph with detailed descriptions, hoping someone somewhere might recognize her. The rise of television programs focused on unsolved cases also briefly renewed his hopes. Roberto wrote letters to producers and journalists, sending photos and details about the case, but the response was always the same. Without new evidence or leads, Juana's story didn't generate enough media interest to warrant an investigation. During those intermediate years, Roberto developed his own theory about what had happened to his daughter. Based on research he had done on child trafficking, he believed Juana had been taken to a remote region of the country, possibly given to a family who couldn't have children of their own. This explanation allowed him to cling to the hope that his daughter was still alive, even if in circumstances he couldn't fully imagine. Carmen, though she shared Roberto's hope, had developed a more spiritual perspective. She believed firmly that Juana was under divine protection, no matter where she was. Her daily prayers included specific petitions that her daughter grow up healthy and strong, and that someday, somehow, they would be reunited. Once again, the changes in the neighborhood reflected the passage of time. New businesses had opened. Some old houses had been demolished to make way for more modern buildings, and the demographic makeup had evolved. Dona Mercedes' taco stand, where Juana used to buy candy, had closed years earlier when the elderly woman passed away. In 2008, 12 years after Juana's disappearance, Roberto made a decision that would significantly change his professional life. He accepted a job offer as a mechanical supervisor for a freight transport company operating nationwide. The job required frequent travel, but it gave him the opportunity to continue his search in a more systematic way and with better pay. Carmen supported her husband's decision, even though she knew it would mean long periods of separation. Both understood that this new phase represented both an opportunity and an emotional risk. But after so many years of stagnation, any change seemed preferable to the routine of silent pain. Roberto's position at the freight company Cargadel Norte opened a completely different world for him. His responsibilities included overseeing the maintenance of a fleet of more than 50 heavy-duty trucks covering routes from the northern border to Mexico's southeast. For the first time in over a decade, he had access to a nationwide network that could aid in his personal search. Every work trip became an opportunity for investigation. Roberto always carried copies of Juana's photo, now digitally updated to show what she might look like at age 17. He had learned basic age progression techniques using computer software, creating images of how his daughter might look at various stages of growth. The drivers and mechanics he worked with gradually came to know Roberto's story. Most showed empathy and solidarity. Some even shared Juana's photo among their contacts in different cities. The trucking community, known for its camaraderie and extensive communication networks, became an unofficial ally in the search. During 2009 and 2010, Roberto systematically visited cities he had never explored before: Tijuana, Ciudad Juarez, Veracruz, Merida. Each destination represented a new possibility. He developed a specific methodology, visiting hospitals, schools, community centers, and police stations, always asking about a young woman who might match his daughter's description. The responses ranged from bureaucratic indifference to genuine compassion, but none led to concrete results. Still, Roberto began meticulously documenting every contact, every lead pursued, every dead end. His notebook became an exhaustive record of more than a decade of searching. Meanwhile, Carmen had taken a more active role in organizations of mothers of missing children, which had begun forming across the country. Through these networks, she heard stories similar to hers, but also cases with both happy and tragic endings. The diversity of experiences gave her a broader perspective on the possible outcomes. In 2011, 15 years after the disappearance, Roberto encountered what he believed was the most promising lead so far. During a layover in Puebla, a local mechanic claimed to have seen a young woman who matched Juana's updated description. She occasionally worked at a local market, appeared to be the right age, and had similar physical features. Roberto spent 3 days in Puebla, repeatedly visiting the market and asking discreet questions. Eventually, he managed to locate the young woman in question. The encounter was devastating. Although the girl had reddish hair and light eyes, she lacked Juana's distinctive mole. A brief conversation revealed she had grown up with her biological family in the same city. This experience, although frustrating, only strengthened Roberto's resolve. If he had managed to track down someone with such similar traits, it meant his methodology had potential. Juana's mole had become his most concrete hope. It was a physical trait impossible to hide or alter, one that would make her identification unmistakable. During these years, advances in digital communication also enabled new search strategies. Roberto created profiles on multiple social media platforms, posted in forums dedicated to missing persons, and established contact with international organizations working on similar cases. Every platform represented a new chance to reach someone who might know something. Roberto and Carmen's marriage had evolved into a deeply committed partnership with a shared goal. Although the periods of separation due to Roberto's job were difficult, both understood that each trip represented a renewed opportunity. Their nightly phone calls always included updates on the search and plans for upcoming investigations. In 2013, Carmen made a significant decision. She learned how to use computers and digital technology. At age 45, she enrolled in basic computer courses at the local community center. Her goal was to better support Roberto's search efforts, particularly in the realm of social media and online communication. The year 2014 marked a subtle but significant turning point in the search for Juana. Roberto had built a network of contacts that spanned the entire country, from public transport drivers to social workers, all aware of the story of the missing girl with a distinctive mole. His reputation as a reliable mechanic had opened doors and built trust with people who were usually cautious when it came to discussing sensitive topics. During a work trip to Oaxaca, Roberto made contact with Maria Elena Vasquez, a social worker specialized in human trafficking cases. Maria Elena had heard Roberto's story through a network of civil organizations and decided to share information that might be relevant to his search. According to her, there were specific patterns in child abduction cases that partially matched the circumstances of Juana's disappearance. Children with distinctive physical features, especially those with European or fair mestizo appearance, were often relocated to regions where their look would not raise suspicion. This information gave Roberto a new perspective on where to search. Tourist zones, particularly those frequented by foreigners, could be logical destinations for children with Juana's features. Also, rural areas where isolated communities might more easily absorb a child without asking questions were considered viable leads. Meanwhile, Carmen had developed significant skills in digital investigation. She had learned to use advanced search engines, public databases, and specialized social networks. Her afternoons were divided between her parish responsibilities and intensive online searches scanning photographs, profiles, and any piece of information that might be connected to her daughter. In 2015, Carmen made a discovery that shook the entire family. While browsing photos on a forum dedicated to locating missing persons, she found the image of a young woman who bore an uncanny resemblance to the age progression portraits of Juana. The photo had been posted by someone seeking to identify people in vulnerable situations. The investigation of this lead took several weeks. Roberto traveled specifically to Guadalajara, where the photo had supposedly been taken. However, after an exhaustive search including visits to shelters, social service centers, and places where homeless individuals often gathered, he was unable to find the young woman in question. Although that specific lead didn't produce results, the process had significantly refined their search techniques. Roberto had learned how to navigate complex social systems, establish connections with frontline workers, and access information typically unavailable to the general public. During this period, Roberto also began systematically documenting his search through a personal blog. His posts detailed not only Juana's story, but also the search experiences, the people he met, and the lessons learned along the way. The blog began attracting readers who offered emotional support and occasionally new leads to investigate. The growing online visibility also brought unexpected contacts, other parents in similar situations. Others in similar situations contacted Roberto, sharing search strategies and offering mutual support. A virtual community of families affected by disappearances formed, united by shared experiences and a common determination. In 2016, 20 years after the initial disappearance, Roberto made the decision to expand his search into regions he had previously considered unlikely. The northern border areas, where criminal activity was more intense, but also where more investigative resources existed, became his new focus. This decision required careful preparation. Roberto established contacts with human rights organizations operating in border zones. He learned safety protocols for investigating in dangerous areas and developed strategies to maximize the effectiveness of his searches while minimizing personal risks. Carmen fully supported this new phase, although both acknowledged it represented the greatest opportunity and the greatest danger they had faced in 2 decades of searching. The northern border might hold answers, but also risks that could endanger not only the search, but Roberto's safety and, by extension, the entire family. The morning of March 15, 2016, began like any other workday for Roberto. His route would take him from Monterey to Laredo, Texas, transporting automotive parts to an assembly plant. It was a familiar trip he had made dozens of times, but one that always offered him opportunities to continue his systematic search in the towns along the way. At 2:30 p.m., while driving along the federal highway connecting Sabinas Hidalgo with Colombia, Nuevo Leon, Roberto began to feel early signs of fatigue that required a mandatory stop. Cargo transport regulations demanded specific rest periods, and he had identified a service area about 5 kilometers ahead where he could safely park his truck. The rest stop was typical for the region: a basic gas station, a small restaurant, serving set meals, and several spaces designated for heavy truck drivers to rest. Roberto had stopped there on previous occasions. The owner, Don Aurelio, knew his story and always allowed him to distribute photos of Juana among the local clientele. As he stepped down from the truck to stretch his legs, Roberto noticed new advertisements posted along the fence that bordered the service area. Most promoted local products, automotive services, and a few upcoming events in nearby towns. As he walked toward the restaurant, Roberto saw the poster that would change his life forever. Among the colorful ads and commercial flyers stood an image that he didn't fully register at first. His mind, conditioned by 20 years of scanning faces in crowds and photographs, took several seconds to process what he was seeing. The poster advertised adult entertainment services. It featured a young woman, approximately 25 years old, with curly reddish hair and clearly visible blue eyes. But what made Roberto freeze in place was the small, perfectly visible circular mole on the left side of her face. In those first moments, Roberto experienced a total disconnect from reality. His legs began trembling uncontrollably. His vision blurred, and a wave of intense dizziness forced him to lean against the wire fence. The initial shock was so severe that his body couldn't process the information. His eyes were sending. The photo on the poster clearly showed the face of a young woman who matched the age progression images he and Carmen had created of Juana. Every detail aligned: the shape of her eyes, her facial structure, the exact hair color, and especially the distinctive mole that had remained his only certainty over 2 decades of searching. The poster included a stage name, Esperanza, and a local phone number. It also listed a specific rate: 300 Mexican pesos for services Roberto didn't want to imagine. But that reality was forcing him to confront. The full understanding of what he was seeing struck Roberto like an electric jolt. His daughter, the 5-year-old girl who had vanished while playing in the street, had survived for 20 years, but under circumstances that represented his worst nightmare as a father. The emotional shock was so intense that Roberto completely lost consciousness. His body collapsed beside the road, causing several motorists to stop and help. His fall caused a partial traffic jam, as his location blocked both directions. Don Aurelio, upon hearing the commotion, ran out of the restaurant and immediately recognized Roberto. He called emergency services while other drivers helped move the unconscious man to a safer spot. The advertisement remained there, indifferent to the human tragedy it had triggered. When Roberto regained consciousness at the regional hospital in Sabinas Hidalgo, his first action was to ask about the poster. The paramedics and doctors didn't understand his obsession with an advertisement, but Roberto knew. He had finally found what he had searched for during 20 years of his life. The next 24 hours in the hospital were the longest of Roberto's life. Doctors had determined his fainting was caused by severe emotional shock, but insisted on keeping him under observation to rule out cardiac complications. Roberto, however, could think only of the poster and the urgent need to confirm what he believed he had discovered. Carmen arrived at the hospital at dawn the next day, after traveling all night from San Luis Potosi. Roberto had explained the situation to her over the phone, but the conversation had been fragmented and confusing due to his emotional state. When they finally reunited in person, Roberto described in detail what he had seen, every physical trait he had recognized, every feature confirming his terrible discovery. Carmen's initial reaction was absolute denial. For 20 years, she had held on to the hope that Juana was living a normal life somewhere far away, perhaps with an adoptive family who loved and cared for her. The idea that her daughter had survived in such degrading conditions was something her mind initially refused to process. However, when Roberto described the specific mole on the left cheek, exactly in the same position and with the same circular shape that had marked Juana since birth, Carmen began to grasp the terrible truth. That mole was unique, unmistakable, impossible to fake or confuse with any other mark. Don Aurelio, who had accompanied Roberto to the hospital and remained as a moral witness throughout the situation, confirmed the poster's existence. He recalled, "It had been there for about 2 weeks and had been put up by promoters who often used that location to advertise events in nearby towns. The decision to return to the discovery site was immediate. As soon as doctors authorized Roberto's release, the couple headed directly to the service area. Carmen needed to see with her own eyes the image that had caused her husband's emotional collapse. The poster was still there, exactly as Roberto had described. Carmen approached it slowly, her hands trembling as she adjusted her glasses to examine every detail of the photograph. The age progression they had imagined for years had come to life before her eyes. Juana had grown into a young woman, but under unimaginably painful circumstances. The information on the poster included a phone number with a local area code from Nuevo Laredo, about 4 hours away. It also mentioned that the services were offered at a specific establishment called Club Nocturno Las Mariposas, located in a part of the city known for adult entertainment activity. Roberto and Carmen spent hours analyzing every aspect of the photograph, mentally comparing it to their memories of Juana and the digital progressions they had created. Every match confirmed what they both knew, but still struggled to fully accept. They had found their daughter after 20 years, but in the most traumatic conditions imaginable. The decision to contact local authorities was problematic from the start. The police chief in Sabinas Hidalgo showed asterisk. There was skepticism about the identification based solely on an advertising photograph. Furthermore, it was suggested that any investigation related to adult entertainment establishments in Nuevo Laredo would require coordination with state and possibly federal authorities. Roberto insisted that the mole was sufficient evidence to justify an immediate investigation. He had meticulously documented Juana's physical characteristics over 20 years, and no detail had changed in his memory. The circular mole on her left cheek was as distinctive as a fingerprint. However, bureaucratic procedures required time, and Roberto and Carmen were unwilling to lose any. After 2 decades of intense searching, the possibility of losing Juana's trail again due to administrative delays was unacceptable. That night, in a hotel room in Sabinas Hidalgo, Roberto and Carmen made the most difficult decision of their lives. They would travel to Nuevo Laredo on their own, locate the establishment mentioned on the poster, and personally confirm the young woman's identity before involving the authorities. It was a dangerous decision that placed them in unfamiliar territory both geographically and emotionally. Nuevo Laredo had a reputation for violence and criminal activity, requiring extreme caution. Additionally, confronting directly the reality of what had happened to their daughter was a psychological trauma for which they were not prepared. But after 20 years of frustrated hope, Roberto and Carmen were willing to face any danger or pain to recover Juana and free her from the conditions in which she had apparently been living. The trip to Nuevo Laredo was silent and tense. Roberto drove with absolute determination, while Carmen prayed constantly, alternating between prayers of gratitude for having found Juana and pleas for protection for what they were about to face. Both understood they were entering a world completely foreign to their experience, but their parental love outweighed any fear or apprehension. They arrived in the city at dusk, when the neon lights began illuminating the nighttime entertainment areas. The nightclub Las Mariposas was located in a district clearly lacking regular police presence. The surrounding buildings showed signs of decay, and the people walking the streets had an appearance that confirmed the nature of the area. Roberto and Carmen parked at a safe distance from the establishment and observed the activity for almost an hour. Men of various ages entered and exited regularly. Some looked like local workers, others clearly visitors from outside the city. The music escaping the club was loud and fast-paced. Their strategy, discussed during the trip, was simple, but risky. Roberto would enter the club as a potential customer, locate the young woman from the poster, and confirm her identity by the distinctive mole. If she turned out to be Juana, he would find a way to communicate with her and coordinate a rescue plan involving the appropriate authorities. Carmen would remain in the vehicle, maintain constant communication via cell phone, and be ready to contact the police if Roberto did not leave the club within the agreed time. She had also memorized the address and had contact numbers of human rights organizations that could provide assistance in an emergency. At 9:30 p.m., Roberto entered the nightclub Las Mariposas. The interior was exactly as he had expected. Dim lighting, loud music, the smell of cigarette smoke mixed with cheap alcohol. About a dozen men occupied scattered tables, while several young women circulated offering drinks and company. Roberto went straight to the bar and ordered a beer, maintaining a casual appearance while discreetly examining the women present. None of those visible in the main area matched the image on the poster. He asked the bartender about Esperanza, mentioning he had seen her photo in advertising material. The bartender, a middle-aged man with visible scars on his arms, explained that Esperanza mainly worked private services and was not always available. In the common area, Roberto expressed specific interest in meeting her, and after negotiating an initial fee, the bartender agreed to check her availability. The 15 minutes Roberto waited were the longest of his life. Every second represented the possibility of confirming the most important discovery of the past 2 decades, but also the reality of facing the traumatic conditions in which his daughter had been living. When Esperanza finally appeared, Roberto felt his legs weaken again. The young woman approaching his table was undoubtedly Juana, 20 years older, but with the same distinctive physical traits he had memorized all his life. Her reddish hair, though dyed and styled differently, retained its natural texture. Her blue eyes held the same intensity he remembered from her childhood, but it was the circular mole on her left cheek that erased any remaining doubt. It was exactly identical to the one he had kissed thousands of times when Juana was a small child, located in the precise same position and perfectly round shape that had made her unique since birth. Juana sat across from Roberto, with the professional demeanor she had developed over years of working in these conditions. She showed no signs of recognizing the middle-aged man observing her with intense, tightly contained emotion. Her expression was distant, mechanical, protected by psychological defenses she had clearly built to survive. Roberto struggled to maintain composure as he initiated casual conversation, asking about her name, origin, and how long she had been working at the establishment. Juana's answers were monosyllabic and evasive, following a script she had evidently repeated with hundreds of previous clients. It was when Roberto mentioned San Luis Potosi that he noticed the first genuine reaction in Juana's eyes. A brief expression of surprise crossed her face before returning to the professional mask. Roberto continued mentioning specific details of the Tangamanga neighborhood, the taco stand of Dona Mercedes, the church where Carmen organized community events. Juana's reaction gradually intensified. Her hands began to tremble slightly, and her breathing became shallower. When Roberto finally mentioned the name, Juana Esperanza Morales, and described parents who had been searching for her for 20 years, the mask completely collapsed. Tears began to flow down Juana's face as her psychological defenses fractured. In a barely audible voice, she confirmed her true identity and asked if her parents had really been searching for her all this time. Roberto, voice broken with emotion, confirmed they had never stopped looking for her, not a single day over the past 2 decades. The reunion at Los Mariposas nightclub was simultaneously the happiest and most painful moment in Roberto's life. He had found his daughter, confirmed she was alive, but also discovered the indescribable trauma she had endured during her absence. Removing Juana from Los Mariposas required a carefully coordinated operation involving multiple security agencies. Roberto had immediately contacted federal authorities after confirming his daughter's identity, and the response was quick and professional. A specialized human trafficking team arrived from Mexico City to manage the situation. The operation took place in the early hours of the following morning. Juana was secretly transferred to a safe hotel where she reunited with Carmen for the first time in 20 years. The meeting between mother and daughter was devastatingly emotional. Carmen could not stop touching Juana's face, repeatedly confirming she was real and had finally returned. Juana, however, showed obvious signs of the psychological trauma accumulated over 2 decades of captivity and abuse. Her ability to trust had been severely damaged, and although she emotionally recognized her parents, she needed time to process the reality of her rescue. The trauma specialists accompanying the rescue team explained that recovery would be a long and complex process. During initial interviews with authorities, Juana revealed the full story of her disappearance and the subsequent years. She had been kidnapped by a human trafficking network that operated systematically and different initially. She was taken to Tamaulipas, where she was kept in absolute captivity for several years. As she grew older, she was repeatedly moved to different locations, always under the control of the same criminal organization. Her education was minimal, limited only to what was necessary to function in the situations imposed on her. For years, she fantasized about the possibility that her parents were searching for her, but gradually she lost hope of being found. The resulting investigation uncovered a criminal network that had operated for decades, victimizing hundreds of minors under similar conditions. Juana's case became the key to dismantling operations across multiple states, resulting in dozens of arrests and the rescue of other victims. Roberto and Carmen faced the reality that physically recovering Juana was only the first step in a healing process that would require years of specialized therapy and infinite patience. Juana needed to relearn basic social skills, develop trust in normal human relationships, and process 2 decades of accumulated trauma. The family returned to San Luis Potosi, but to a different home. The Tangamanga neighborhood held too many painful memories for Juana, who experienced severe anxiety episodes when confronted with familiar places from her childhood. Roberto used his savings, accumulated over years of searching, to purchase a house in a quieter area of the city. The social reintegration process was gradual and carefully supervised by trauma specialists. Juana required comprehensive medical care, including treatment for physical health issues resulting from years of neglect and abuse. She also needed intensive psychological therapy to develop coping mechanisms for post-traumatic stress. Carmen became a full-time caregiver, learning specialized techniques to support trauma victims. Her previous experience working with families in crisis was invaluable, but caring for her own daughter required a level of patience and understanding entirely different. Roberto continued working, but significantly modified his responsibilities to stay close to his family. The transportation company, aware of his story, offered him an administrative position that required fewer trips. His colleagues, many of whom had known about Juana's search for years, provided emotional and practical support during the transition. Gradually, Juana began to show signs of recovery. She completed her basic education through specialized adult programs, developed an interest in artistic activities as occupational therapy, and slowly began to establish appropriate social relationships under professional supervision. 5 years after the rescue, in 2021, Juana had developed enough emotional stability to participate in prevention programs, sharing her experience to help other families affected by disappearances. Her testimony became a powerful tool to raise awareness about human trafficking and the importance of never giving up the search. Roberto and Carmen, now in their 60s, had found renewed purpose in supporting other families with missing children. Their 20-year search experience and Juana's recovery process made them valuable resources for organizations dedicated to these issues. The Morales family story became a symbol of perseverance and hope for communities affected by disappearances. Although the trauma would never completely disappear, they had demonstrated that family love and unwavering determination could overcome even the most devastating circumstances. The small circular mole on Juana's left cheek, which had been the key to her identification after 20 years, became a symbol of an identity preserved despite years of attempts to erase her personality. It was the physical mark connecting the traumatized adult woman to the 5-year-old girl who had disappeared while playing in the streets of Tangamanga. The Morales family had learned that some wounds never fully heal, but unconditional love and persistent hope can create new beginnings even after the most devastating losses. Their story continued to be written, one day at a time, with the certainty that they were finally together again. If you've made it this far and want to see more stories like this, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any stories. Leave your like so we can keep sharing more stories like this. Until next time.